Mojika, Truth Rears Its Ugly Head is a very rough visual novel. It just goes to show how raw, crude, and brutal this game is when the actual English publisher of the game comes out and announces they have been issuing full refunds for emotional trauma. Mojika does not play around. It's a psychological revenge story about a man willing to burn everything to the ground using his superpower. I myself got very uncomfortable at certain scenes, and I've read stuff like sadistic blood, maggot baits, and euphoria before. And yet, if you're somehow able to stick around and get through those rough filters, you'll get a very intriguing, extremely unique story by Nitroplus in return. Tsuteru Tanizaki is a guy who's been bullied all throughout his life. He can't even look at people normally anymore. However, he has one unique superpower, his word sight, a special ability that allows him to read minds. The ultimate trump card to see the true hidden secrets people have locked away from public eyes. And after one traumatic incident, he's decided he's finally had enough. Now, this isn't a glorified revenge story, one where the hero tramples over the people who've wronged him, attains a harem of beautiful girls, and ultimately wins in the end. This is an ugly showcase of what happens to people when they are confronted with the harsh, ugly truth, both about themselves and how others see them. It's more interested in exploring human nature and perception despite how uncomfortable it may be, only done so from the most crude way possible. I praise Mojika for that. However, you cannot dismiss the voyeuristic nature of it either, seeing a man finally getting his payback, sadistically torturing the girls who's beat him down constantly. It's really violent and horrific at times. And yet, how Mojika actually presents it has to be one of the most unique things about this visual novel. I've never seen anything like it before. There's first-person perspective, and then there's Mojika's version of first-person perspective. The script is smacked right in front of your face, line by line, thought by thought, quite literally through the eyes of Tsuteru. Production value here is just insane, with all these individual camera angles and shot direction. And then on top of that, the massive barrage of the word sight text of various sizes and effects. Pair that with the script writing itself and the harsh sounding rock music, and Mojika becomes this raw, immersive experience. Despite characters vocalizing their intentions, you'll get to see through them through word sight, and ultimately what these people attempt to convince themselves inside. Even the R18 scenes has another dimension of commentary going on, challenging true intimate feelings. The presentation is one of the most standout things about this visual novel, despite the fact that you'll be looking at the ground like 70% of the time. Really, I don't expect anything less from the developers at Nitroplus, the same people who brought you You, Me, and Her / Totsuno, Tokyo Necro, and Full Metal Demon Muramasa. They're always out here creating incredibly creative works in the medium, some of which are very highly loved and rated, although I can see most people steering clear away from Mojika because of its harsh material. In fact, Mojika is so incredibly vicious in nature that I would even call it a mixture between Nitroplus and Clock Up, the same developers behind Euphoria and Maggot Baits. It's incredibly rough at times. I've seen my fair share of torture scenes in visual novels, but there's a couple of scenes in here that had me very distressed. The last sequence of scenes in Kirara's route had me physically wincing, something equally similar to how I felt when I watched Higurashi's fingernail scenes back in the day. Again, I would not recommend this to anyone who has a low tolerance to this type of content, regardless of it being explicit in nature or not. I don't blame people for the refund. But I had the most amusing time with it regardless, because that presentation enables some really interesting story situations and mechanics. It may be incredibly dull to see Tsuteru look at the ground like 70% of the time, but the moments when he does look up are real significant for the reader. In the story, you are given the option to decide if Tsuteru looks up. These decisions reflect Tsuteru's dilemma on whether or not he wants to see the minds of people, and as a result, their true feelings. It's a very conscious effort too. I can choose to see Tsuteru's co-conspirator Miu to check if she plans on double-crossing him, or I can decide not to make Tsuteru hide from seeing how she truly feels about him and his plans. The safe answer she can say is no, but in reality, clearly she was just holding back. There are a fair amount of choices like this, and each one has importance in how the story chooses to progress, which is why I heavily recommend using a guide to get all of the endings. The true ending in particular is very non-intuitive, and honestly, kind of a hassle to get. There's one condition where it required me to just not do anything for like 6 attempts until a certain trigger happens. Was not a fan. Once I actually got into the routes, I had a more enjoyable experience. Well, more morbid curiosity in seeing these characters' true inner desires. desires, self-destructive or not. At first, Mojika shows you how Suteru's trauma grows into an explosion of hatred to then show you the consequences. His revenge doesn't have a simple conclusion. In fact, what's really going on is these routes showing its heroines reaching their full potential. I say it like that because most often, the situation at the very end ends up looking like the absolute worst situation for Suteru, for the heroine, or both of them. But I wouldn't consider that bad story and character development. Here we see how Suteru's actions have changed himself and the girls, usually not in a good way. Engagements aren't romantic at all. Most of them outright hate Suteru from beginning to end, and yet, in a strange way, they owe it to him. Mojika is more interested in bluntly telling you how these characters learn to embrace their true selves, and additionally to Suteru, his search to become free. And this is done all through a combination of revenge plotting, confronting one's real feelings, and even accepting white lies too. I actually like some of the routes because of how drastically they've all changed, and how messed up things devolved into at the very end. Again, I'm not going to lie, seeing and reading Mojika filled me with a sense of morbid curiosity. Instead of wholesome romance, hype action titles, or thought-provoking mysteries, I chose to read something drastically and boldly different. I wanted to see where Suteru's revenge took him, fully knowing he would be destroyed in the end. To which then I was eventually betrayed. I fully believe that despite the crude, harsh material, how Mojika ended its heroine routes, seeing the conclusion of Suteru's harrowing journey of self-discovery is noteworthy. The problem is how Mojika as a whole ended. The true route I was not a big fan of. If I really had to point out where it all went wrong, it was the intrusion of a certain lore plot point that gets introduced much later on. For those of you who have read this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Popped out of nowhere like an unsolicited dick pic. Now, to first explain, Mojika as a revenge story is a whole ordeal on its own, but Suteru's case becomes a lot more interesting when this whole situation was the precursor to something a lot more deeper. It's a first I've seen in fiction where bullying a poor guy led into full-on conspiracy theories. Suteru's hasty scheming might be happening before your eyes, but there's always new information being dropped between all of the rounds. Certain story elements are notable: the strict academy setting, the Tamasa drug, Kido City as a whole, and the political struggle within it. There's a lot more happening behind the scenes, and the mysterious figure called Emiko is always somewhere watching the events unfold. It adds more intrigue to the ongoing narrative besides the ruthless revenge plot. However, the answers I got in return was unsatisfying with a dash of notable disappointment. Skip to this section over here for my final thoughts, as this will be the small spoiler section of this video. My opinions on the very questionable plot point and the last two routes of the game. You ready? It all started right when the giant penis tree showed up. The backstory of how it came to be in the first place, despite it being based on an actual Japanese myth, felt ridiculous and reaching as hell. Which brings me to Tsubaki and her route. For as much as Mojika loosely implies her to be the true heroine, she very much isn't. I really like Tsubaki's concept, a person immune to word sight at the cost of her emotions and feelings. Watching Suteru and Tsubaki's relationship grow together is very nice. And then I felt horribly betrayed at the horrific ending they got in her route, losing to the giant penis tree. I know I shouldn't have expected a good ending, but this was the one instance where I wanted one, in comparison to the actual good true ending. After what I personally felt was a very cumbersome process route-wise, the true heroine is ultimately revealed to be Naruko. She has her whole fight with her father, which ends up causing repercussions around her as this hidden mastermind, and that's fine. It makes her a very hateable person for revenge. So it's a very interesting choice when the story goes on this wild adventure and interconnected flashback reveal about the two's past relationship. So much shit is thrown in here in this final true route. The two's past history, the memory loss, the origin of the word sight ability, not to mention the ability to just straight up counter it, and then just the penis tree altogether. I think I understand what's going on paper, but seeing this all in retrospect sounds like a mess. Naruko's route is my least favorite by far. It ends on a happy ending, yes, but I found the story more satisfying seeing Suteru, a very unsympathetic, unlikable guy, blow himself up instead. Mojika is not for everyone, even for fans of this medium, but for those morbidly curious, ones with a tough tolerance, and are looking for something different, you might want to give this a shot. shot. To be quite honest, this isn't my cup of tea either, but I can appreciate the ideas that the author and the developers wanted to explore in here, even if it wasn't great in execution. It leans more into the presentation and atmosphere rather than the writing for sure. Enough where I can definitely say Mojika is a one-of-a-kind psychological experience for sure, and something you really can't see anywhere else besides eroge visual novels. I would like to thank everyone on Patreon for supporting me in covering visual novels. You guys are fantastic, and if you'd like to be a part of that effort, please consider subscribing. Now, if you're interested in another very interesting visual novel, you might want to check out this video over here, or this one for a list of general recommendations. And lastly, don't jump into giant phallic trees.